our neurodivergent kiddos, they often have really, really cool skills. They're often very gifted in a lot of different areas, and leaning in on that when we are planning a social activity, if they're really interested in Legos and they're really great at building Legos, like that should be an activity that they maybe can invite a friend to do with them, or maybe they like Minecraft, so they could set up a Minecraft obstacle course together. So just building in their strengths and their interests is going to just naturally get them a little bit more involved.
I'm Rachel.
And I'm Jessica, and this is All Things Sensory by Harkla.
We are both certified occupational therapy assistants, and together with Harkla, we are on a mission to empower parents, therapists, and educators to help raise confident and strong children of all abilities.
On this podcast, we chat about all things sensory, diving into special needs, occupational therapy, parenting, self-care, overall health and wellness, and so much more.
We are here to provide raw, honest, and fun strategies, ideas, and information for parents, therapists, and educators, as well as other professionals to implement into daily life.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey there, welcome to All Things Sensory by Harkla. We're happy to have you here today. I'm Rachel.
And I'm Jessica.
And today we're talking about how to help neurodivergent kiddos make friends. This was a question that I got on my Instagram, and I thought it would be a really good podcast episode because I know the person who sent this question is not alone in thinking this. And, we all just want our kiddos to make friends and be happy. And that includes neurodivergent kiddos as well.
Yeah, and right before we were recording, I was telling Rachel how we just did a social group activity at the clinic with 3 of our clients, and how it was so fun to watch them engage with each other, and how, as OT practitioners, we're helping them with the social component and the emotional regulation and the impulse control to help them have fun in this social situation. And, our neurodivergent kids face a lot of challenges sometimes. Mm-hmm. And one of those challenges are social interactions and making and keeping friends. I mean, it's hard for, kids without neurodivergence, like a neurotypical kid, it's hard to have friends. So it's even extra hard for these neurodivergent kids who struggle with sensory processing and impulse control and attention and emotional regulation. It's extra hard.
And that's really the beautiful thing about OT in general. Like if you have a kiddo who isn't OT, hopefully your therapist is doing those activities like Jessica mentioned, and kind of getting similar aged, and similar like-minded kiddos together, and they're doing group activities together. Because when you have, kiddos who are doing an activity together and they each have a supportive therapist who can kind of help, guide and keep the conversations flowing and keep the activities going. It's really helpful for them to learn in that controlled environment, in a safe environment. And if they're struggling with impulse control or, functional communication, they've got someone there who's on their team and can kind of help, just make that friendship and that communication and socializing just a little bit easier. So number one, want to make sure that we do give our shout out to just like OTs, and making sure that if you do have a neurodivergent kiddo and they're not an OT, maybe that's a good place to start in order to help work towards improving their friendships or helping them learn to make friends too.
Yeah, and I think, when we think about friendships, we think about like this big group of friends that your kid is hanging out with, but that's not always the case. Sometimes, you just need like that one good friend for your kid, and that's enough.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about these big, huge groups of friends. It's going to be whatever your child wants, whatever you as a family want. And in therapy, we get to address this in a lot of different ways. So why is friendship hard for neurodivergent kids? The first one is that like social challenge of taking turns, reading body language, perspective taking. Often our neurodivergent kids struggle in these areas, so they prefer to play alone, where they can keep the control over the situation, and they don't have to think about what the other kids are doing or what they need.
Yeah, and then think about the sensory sensitivity component too. If there's an overwhelming group of kiddos, if there's a loud, busy environment, if the lights are too bright, if it's too noisy, if it's too busy and chaotic, it can be distracting or overwhelming. My kiddos just, if there's like a lot happening, they won't even play. They'll just like watch what everyone else is doing. instead of like being able to, kind of, not think about what else is happening and just focus on what they need to play on. They're like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
So it can be really overwhelming from a sensory standpoint too.
Yep. And then there's going to be some executive function components here as well. Attention, impulse control, remembering the rules and being able to follow rules of a game, flexible thinking to allow different points of view. Oftentimes those executive function skills are really challenging for our neurodivergent kids because executive function lives in that prefrontal cortex, and oftentimes that's a challenge.
Exactly. And then also think about communication differences. Some kiddos are non-speaking or pre-verbal. Some kiddos are, hyper-verbal, and sometimes they just don't recognize what things are expected to say and what's unexpected to say, those boundaries. Some kiddos communicate via AAC devices, some kiddos use sign language, some kiddos use words. Like, there's so many different ways of communication, and bringing that all together into a social event can be challenging, which is why it's so helpful in that like coveted, therapeutic environment to like get kids comfortable to communicate how they communicate best.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that friendship and making friends is about connection, right? It's not about the quantity, like I mentioned, but it's about these kids connecting with each other. And in therapy, I feel like we do a really good job of building that connection between us, the therapist, and the child, but we want to give these children the opportunity to build those connections with their peers as well.
Mm-hmm. And then really just like a fun quote, it's not that they don't want friends, it's that the path to connection looks different. I just thought that was so helpful. Everyone's path to connection looks so different, especially for our neurodivergent kiddos. So
yeah. So from an OT perspective, some tips, some strategies, some tools. The first thing is to create a structured play opportunity. And this is done really well in the OT therapy setting. But if you're a parent listening, if you're a teacher, educator, you can do this as well. And, create scenarios or situations where your child has adult support, has you there to support them. This is exactly what we did in the clinic the other day, where the kids were sitting, on the floor around each other, and then we were kind of a little bit back, but we were still there to help guide them. So you can do this with a board game. You can do this with an obstacle course. That's actually a really great way to get these kids engaging with each other, and you learn turn taking and safety and communication during those obstacle courses. Building activities, whether it's with blocks or Legos or any sort of building material. Maybe for some of our older kiddos, a cooking activity would be a great social activity to set up, but it really helps to have that support from the adult therapist, parent, teacher to provide, tips during the social interactions of like, you could say this to them if you want, or hey, they just did this, what do you think? And giving them those cues for the social interactions.
And kind of going along with that, role playing and social stories or sensory stories can be really helpful too, because you are giving them the opportunity to practice in a safe environment of what they could say in a certain situation, or if their body is feeling dysregulated, what's an appropriate way of meeting their sensory need. Instead of pushing the kiddo, maybe they could push their hands together or push the wall in order to meet their needs. So kind of walking them through those different environments or those different situations with their peers as, an adult, a safe adult, to kind of role play back and forth can be helpful as well for our kiddos, just to learn like, this is the process of, talking with a kid. I mean, I do this with my kiddos. I basically talk my kids through a social story every time we go someplace new. Like today, they went to this like mud kitchen thing, and it was like this new place, and they're like, what are we doing? And so I was like walking them through like a social story basically of like, okay, you're gonna go put your backpack here, and you can play with all of these things, and here's what you can say if you have to go to the bathroom or if you need help. So it's like giving them that structure and that like way to communicate to their peers like understand and visualize. Like all of those things are so important.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times our neurodivergent kids are very visual, and so talking but having a visual aid to support what you're saying is going to be really important. So pictures of where you're going in this social situation, pictures of their sensory strategies and tools that they can use in the moment when needed, pictures of two kids playing together and examples of what it might look like will be helpful too.
Yeah, and then also, building on their strengths and their interests, right? So our neurodivergent kiddos, they often have really, really cool skills. They're often very gifted in a lot of different areas, and leaning in on that when we are planning a social activity, if they're really interested in Legos and they're really great at building Legos, like that should be an activity that they maybe can invite a friend to do with them, or maybe they like Minecraft, so they could set up a Minecraft obstacle course together. So just building in their strengths and their interests is going to just naturally get them a little bit more involved.
This kind of goes along with that too, but if you are taking your child to OT and there is another client there at the same time as your child, and from your OT's reports that your child and this other kiddo who is there at the same time are doing activities together during therapy, it would be a really great idea to connect with that parent in the waiting room and say, hey, would you be interested in our kids getting together and hanging out, doing a play date, whatever? And you can kind of start to build those friendships in that way as well. Therapists, this would be a really great opportunity to create some sort of play group or club for your clients of varying ages, varying interests. If you know that you have like 5 clients throughout the week who love Legos, can you set up something where they can come in and do a social activity together with Legos?
Or even maybe like an open gym type of an activity. Maybe on, Friday afternoons, you open the therapy clinic and you have like an open-ended playtime for different aged kiddos. And obviously there's parents and therapists there, but wouldn't that be cool to just use that space that they're already familiar with to connect with similar aged and, interests with their peers?
Yes.
So there you go.
Yep. Lots of different ideas, especially as therapists working with these kids. There's so many ways that you can facilitate social interactions to build these skills and build these friendships. Let's talk about sensory friendly strategies. We want to make sure that we are working with our kids on self-regulation tools and what they can do when they feel dysregulated in a social situation. So that's where the social stories come in, the practice comes in. Make sure that if you are going somewhere for a social activity, that your child has their tools with them. Maybe they can take their noise canceling headphones, maybe they can take their chewing gum, maybe they can wear their ankle weights under their pants or a compression shirt under their t-shirt so that they have those sensory tools available when needed.
Yeah, definitely. And just make sure that those biological needs are met as well. Make sure if we're planning a play date or we're doing activities together, going to a social group, we've gone to the bathroom, we've hydrated, we've had a snack, or we pack those things as well. So that way those biological needs are met and they're just, physically, mentally, emotionally set up for success.
Yep. You can teach these kids different scripts, different social scripts. I will kind of throw out a little bit of caution here with our GLP kids, Gestalt language processors, that these scripts can sometimes not be helpful in different situations. If the child uses a script and then has a really negative experience after using a certain script, like maybe they say, "Can I play?" and they say that to a child and that child pushes them down, then they're going to have a negative association with that script, "Can I play?" And you don't want them to continue using that, because then they're going to start using it when they don't feel safe or when they're upset. So being kind of careful with the scripts with our GLP kids.
That's a good point.
Maybe working with a speech language pathologist who has some training in this would be good. That was on our list, and I was just kind of thinking about how that could backfire.
Yeah, definitely. For sure.
So
yeah, and I think also maybe in the school setting, buddying up and having pairs with a buddy system. So sometimes maybe if we have a 5th grade neurodivergent student who is pretty doing pretty well, but some fun things that you can incorporate is have them mentor maybe a kindergartner or something, and have them be the leader and the teacher, and kind of reverse that role too, because how often do our neurodivergent kiddos get to be the leaders and get to be the teachers and like get to teach another kiddo how to do something? Like, I just feel like that opportunity doesn't happen for them very often. I mean, it's one of the reasons why here at Heart Club we love Game Changers Idaho so much, because they have that mentoring program where, you know, all kiddos can be the mentors and help other kiddos regardless of neurodivergent or neurotypical. And I just think that's a really cool skill to foster, is giving these kiddos the opportunity to mentor younger kiddos or other peers as well, and kind of giving them that responsibility.
And this is something that you can very easily do in the clinic during your OT sessions. If you are working with a child who is 10 or 11 years old and another therapist is working with maybe a kindergarten kid, you can pair them up and have the older child teach the younger child something as part of that OT session. And then you can create some different play groups and mentoring groups as well for your clients to come in and learn these mentoring teaching skills. And then you're just going to see their confidence explode. Like, it's amazing to see that happen.
It is. That's one of my favorite things to do. So I think that's helpful to keep in mind. And then, you know, like I've said, like we've all said, just making sure that we are praising the effort, not the outcome here. So we really want to give these kids positive feedback, even if they try to interact with a new peer, or if they try to initiate a conversation and maybe it doesn't go as well as they'd planned. Just make sure that you are giving them that positive feedback and helping to build their confidence here, because a lot of the reasons why they are struggling with making friends is they don't have the confidence. They haven't practiced it enough, and they really need that confidence boost in order to feel successful in making those new connections.
And also allowing the child to end the social activity whenever they feel like they need to. You know, maybe your child is interacting with a peer or a friend and they're getting overstimulated because their friend is very hyperactive and very loud. And so you can help your child. You see them starting to get too overwhelmed. You can help your child say, oh, you know what? I need a little bit of a break. And you can help them take that break. Or if the child says, I'm all done, I don't want to play anymore, honor that request and say, okay, if we're all done playing, let's let our friend know and we'll help them clean up and then we'll leave.
Yeah, that's a really big part. Sometimes they'll just like turn and leave and they won't like say, okay, bye, thanks for playing. So teaching them how to like end the play date as well is super helpful. Okay, I think my last piece of advice, which is always my advice, is to empathize, right? Empathize in the fact that it is going to be a little bit more challenging for our neurodivergent kiddos to make friends and keep friends. So just empathize with our kiddos. And, you know, maybe you struggle with making friends too, and you guys can connect on that. Regardless of if you're a parent or a therapist or a teacher, sharing those experiences with your clients or with your kiddos, saying, yeah, like when I was in middle school, I had this hard experience and here's how I overcame it, and really connecting and building rapport with them is just so helpful.
Yeah, and you know what? We didn't really talk about this very much, but for our neurodivergent kids who maybe don't use mouth words, who are non-speaking, maybe they use an AAC device to communicate, those kids, one of my best tips for building social skills and friends with them is to do an interactive gross motor obstacle course playground type activity and build friendships that way, because typically those kids are like the movers and the groovers, and they're not going to necessarily sit down and play a back and forth game with their peers. They're the ones who, it's like they want to swing and slide and climb, and so they can build these friendships through those big movement activities and take turns and use their AAC to say, that was fun, or let's do some more, you know, those kind of things. So
I love that.
I think that's important to note as well.
Yeah. If you have any questions or if you have any ideas that you'd like to share, we encourage you to reach out, take a screenshot of this and share it on Instagram at All Things Sensory Podcast, and leave a review wherever you're listening, and just let us know what other topics we can talk about that would be helpful for you.
Yep. Great. Hope it was helpful, and we'll see you next week for a new episode.
Oops, sorry. Say that again.
No. What? Just say bye.
Okay, bye.
Thank you so much for listening to All Things Sensory by Heart Club.
If you want more information on anything mentioned in the show, head over to harkla.co/podcast to get the show notes.
If you have any follow-up questions, the best place to ask those is in the comments on the show notes or message us on our Instagram account, which is at harkla_family or at All Things Sensory Podcast. If you just search Harkla, you'll find us there.
Like we mentioned before, our podcast listeners get 10% off their first order at Harkla. Whether it's for one of our digital courses or one of our sensory swings, the discount code SENSORY will get you 10% off. That's SENSORY.
Head to harkla.co/sensory to use that discount code right now.
We are so excited to work together to help create confident kids all over the world. While we make every effort to share correct information, we're still learning.
We will double check all of our facts, but realize that medicine is a constantly changing science and art.
One doctor or therapist may have a different way of doing things from another.
We are simply presenting our views and opinions on how to address common sensory challenges, health-related difficulties, and what we have found to be beneficial that will be as evidence-based as possible.
By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast as medical advice to treat any medical condition in either yourself or your child.
Consult your child's pediatrician or therapist for any medical issues that he or she may be having.
This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast.
Thanks so much for listening.